It's Leonard Bernstein's 108th birthday today, and that made me want to talk about him. He was a huge inspiration to me when I discovered him as a teenager, as a triple threat, a pianist, a composer, and a conductor all in one at the highest level. I got exposed to his music just a few years after discovering the music of George Gershwin, another huge influence in my life, and together they've been kind of first loves in the classical music world to me. That's actually what led me to write my latest piece, Lenny and George Walk into a Bar, which I'll talk about later in this video. But just for right now, I figured it was a suitable birthday treat to dig out my 5 favorite Bernstein works for his birthday. Now, what makes Bernstein unique? He was a master of every aspect of his craft. He was a conductor who knew the music inside and out to previously unheard of depths. He was an academic perfectionist who demanded of himself to know exactly what the second clarinet was playing at any given moment in any given piece of music. And out of that grew his own compositions, not that many in number, but actually great in length and many of them hugely significant in music history. He was also an incredible teacher. In fact, teaching is one of the greatest legacies of his career, arguably as influential as his composing and his conducting. He saw education not as a side activity, but as a core part of his mission. And we saw that in the Young People's Concerts that he hosted from 1958 until 1972. They were a series of 53 televised concerts that reached millions of households in the US and were syndicated internationally. He wrote the scripts himself, and he spoke directly to children in a language they could understand, but which were also applicable to adults watching. And he covered topics like what does music mean, study of intervals, what is a mode, jazz in the concert hall, folk music, Latin American influences. And he would host tributes to composers he admired, such as Copland, Ives, Hindemith, and Shostakovich. These concerts won multiple Emmys and introduced an entire generation to classical music. Later on, in 1973, he hosted The Unanswered Question, a series of Harvard Norton lectures, where he traced the evolution of musical language, from tonality through romantic ambiguity and on to 20th century atonality. And he used Charles Ives's Unanswered Question as a central metaphor. And in addition to all that, throughout his life, he returned to Tanglewood nearly every summer to teach young conductors and composers. His masterclasses there were legendary, and they were the basis for the third movement of my work, Lenny and George, which is also called Tanglewood. Anyway, after all that, let's get to it. My 5 favorite Bernstein works. Let's get number 1 out of the way. It is West Side Story. This is Bernstein in 1957 at the peak of his creative powers. It's a modern setting of Romeo and Juliet set on the Upper West Side of 1950s New York. And it's the story of 2 rival street gangs, the Jets and the Sharks, locked in a turf war. Why is it groundbreaking? Pretty much every aspect of it is. There was Jerome Robbins' storytelling through choreography. And if you think about it, that prologue is basically a ballet of gang tension. Bernstein's score mixed jazz and Latin rhythms and serious symphonic writing in a way that Broadway had never heard before. Throughout the score, he used the tritone, the most discordant of all the intervals, and he found numerous ways to exploit the dissonance of that tritone. Not only the gang fights, but even the ballads are laced with that tension of the tritone. And it is the musical DNA that runs all the way through that score. And the themes of West Side Story, racism, immigration, youth violence, these were shocking for a musical in 1957. It was a tragic, socially conscious piece of theater that was groundbreaking for its time. West Side Story has of course spawned multiple films, countless revivals, and in my mind is in the top tier list of musical theater forever. So that's West Side Story. My second item, ironically, is a much lesser known work written at the exact same time as West Side Story, and that is the operetta Candide. This is entirely different in character from West Side Story, and it's ironic that he was composing it at the same time. In fact, there are documented pieces of music that floated between the 2 works until they found their final home. Candide is a glittering, satirical operetta based on Voltaire's novel. The plot of Candide is rather convoluted. Young Candide is mentored by a teacher, Dr. Pangloss, who believes all kinds of weird theories about how the world works, and life immediately proves him wrong, and he's dragged all over the world through all kinds of trials and temptations, watching disaster after disaster until he reunites at the end with his beloved Cunegonde and decides the only sensible thing left is to make our garden grow, which is the finale. It's a pretty messy and obscure plot, but it opens up worlds of musical possibility, which Bernstein exploits fully. The 3-minute overture to Candide is one of the most fun, pleasurable overtures in all of recorded music. It harkens back to the best of Rossini and quotes the dazzling playfulness that's found all the way through Candide. And then, of course, I have to mention the brilliant coloratura showstopper Glitter and Be Gay, where the ditzy soprano bloviates over the beauty of her jewels and performs some unrealistically crazy vocal runs that culminate in a very, very high E-flat held at the very end. Now, I wanted to say I would highly recommend you watch Bernstein's own recording of this. He recorded it towards the end of his life, and even though it's only partially staged, it's brilliant in particular because he stops the performance several times to talk to the audience and give you insights into what he was thinking and why things are the way they are. It's an absolutely brilliant performance that gives you a lot of behind-the-scenes insight into how it was created. But if you can only watch one performance of Glitter and Be Gay, it has to be Kristin Chenoweth, who took this really tricky, almost impossible piece and knocked it out of the ballpark. Kristin Chenoweth is a national treasure, and this performance proves it. It's kind of funny that Candide was actually a flop in its first Broadway incarnation, but it has been revised through the decades and has become a true classic. In fact, the LA Opera is doing it this season. I'll definitely be there to see it. It's witty, it's furious, it's ridiculous fun. The third work of Bernstein I want to highlight is still in the Broadway vein, On the Town. This is a classic Broadway musical. It's earlier in his career. It's still one of his finest. Three sailors, Gaby, Chip, and Ozzie, have 24 hours on the shore of New York before they're picked up. It takes place during World War II, and they spend their 24 hours circling the city for adventure and romance. This musical, which came from 1944, really shows the most profound influence of George Gershwin over Bernstein's work. It's the most you'll see Bernstein show through. And at the end of his life, as Bernstein was methodically recording all of his greatest works, he meant to get to On the Town, but he died before it could be completed. But his friend and protege, Michael Tilson Thomas, completed the recording of that, and it's a great recording. Now, for my fourth Bernstein work, I'm going to shift to some of his more serious works, and I've chosen the Symphony No. 2, The Age of Anxiety. It was written in 1949. It's not really a traditional symphony, and the piano plays a very central role. It's almost like a piano concerto, but not quite. It's based on a poem by W.H. Auden about four lonely strangers who meet in a New York bar during wartime. They drink, talk about the emptiness of modern life, take a cab back to an apartment, party, and then eventually confront their isolation. What's most unique about the symphony is its form. It's just progressive variations, and each section grows out of the previous one rather than returning to a central theme. You get jazz, you get serialism, you get lush romantic writing all colliding at once. Bernstein himself played the piano role at its debut performance in 1949 under his mentor Serge Koussevitzky, and I find it one of his most personal and restless concert works. And my number 5 pick is the 1965 choral work, Chichester Psalms. This was commissioned for the Chichester Cathedral in England, and it's a 3-movement work setting selections from the Book of Psalms in Hebrew. The first movement is joyful and rhythmic as the choir sings "Make a Joyful Noise unto the Lord." The second movement begins slow with a boy soprano singing "The Lord is my shepherd," which is countered by angry men's voices from Psalm 2, "Why do the nations rage?" And the final movement is a peaceful, prayerful close that ends with the words, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity." The funny thing is, as Bernstein was approaching this work, he was in a sabbatical year, and he was experimenting a lot with 12-tone and serialism. But then he ended up throwing most of it away because he felt like it didn't feel honest to him. What came out was this radiant, tonal, accessible piece that mixes a Christian choral tradition with the Jewish liturgical feelings. For me, it's a stunningly powerful plea for brotherhood and peace. So there you go. My 5 favorite Bernstein works. What did I miss? Let me know in the comments. Of course, you can probably tell I am a huge fan of the man, and my love for his music as well as the music of George Gershwin is what led me to write my latest piece, Lenny and George Walk into a Bar, which is a hypothetical meeting between these two Jewish composers who never met in real life, but what if they had? I find the contrast between their musical personalities to be really interesting, with Bernstein the learned academic and Gershwin the street-smart Tin Pan Alley songwriter, both trying to make their mark in music history but coming from very different starting places before they ended up in our history books. I'll leave a link to Lenny and George Walk into a Bar if you'd like to hear it. I really do hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.